Well, there's two ways in my mind you can make a bad decision. The first way is by making no decision. So that I
Okay.
think most people agree. If you make no decision on something, it will be a bad decision because by making no decision, you're freezing yourself and basically not making any movement, any positive kinetic energy towards a goal.
Mhm.
The second way you make a bad decision, as I said, is you make a decision and then you try to drive that decision without taking any input.
What if you could learn directly from the people who've already built what you're chasing? Welcome to Ingleside Reviews, Innovators Unveiled, where founders, creators, and leaders reveal the real strategies behind building brands that last. This is your masterclass in real-world innovation. And now your host, A.D. Edwards.
Welcome to Ingleside Reviews, Innovators Unveil. Every leader loves to talk about innovation after breakthrough, but the real story is usually found in the pressure points before it works, when the market is uncertain, when the technology is changing, and when the person in charge has to keep making decisions without a guarantee. Today's guest, Arthur Chang, President and CEO of PanTerra Networks. Arthur has spent his career building through major waves in technology, from communications and cloud platforms to customer engagement, automation, and now artificial intelligence. But this conversation is not just about technology. It's about the discipline to keep evolving, the pressure of leading through change, the setbacks that test your confidence, and the lessons learned when you're trying to build something that lasts. You can watch Ingleside Reviews Innovators Unveiled on Bravehearts TV, on YouTube, and listen through the Alive Podcast Network app on all major podcast platforms. Arthur Chang, welcome to Ingleside Reviews Innovators Unveiled.
It's great to be here with you.
So, as I mentioned in the introduction, you got a quite remarkable story, but I really want to start, like I do with most interviews, with your origin story. So, Arthur, before we talk about PanTerra, AI, or cloud communications, I want to start with who you were early on. So, what helped shape you to become an entrepreneur and a thinker with an entrepreneur mindset, that is?
It sounds cliche, but I really have to give credit to my parents. Both of my parents were working parents. Both had illustrious careers, one in education. My mother was a teacher, and then later on became a CEO of a business communications company, a telco company. My father worked over 45 years at General Electric Jet Engine Group. And so they taught me perseverance. They taught me basically how to work hard to achieve what you want to achieve. And beyond my parents, I would say my growth in sports in high school also gave me incredible character and building determination, commitment, drive. I was a wrestler in high school, and it really taught me how to persevere, how to
Mhm.
really work towards a goal that you have to put in the time, the effort, the sweat if you really want to achieve things.
Yes, I've often heard that playing sports in high school teaches a lot about valuable lessons that we need in life: teamwork, perseverance, things of that nature. So I guess it was the same with you. Now, when did you first realize that technology was not just something you were interested in, but something you could build a life and career around?
I've always, from an early age, been interested in science, what they call the STEM characteristics. I've always been interested in math. I've entered in a lot of science programs when I early on in my education, won some actually. But it really wasn't until my first job out of college. That first job was with Bell Laboratories, and back in the 80s and 90s, Bell Laboratories was considered the preeminent company for research,
Mhm.
both basic and applied research. And I really got a taste for technology, for research, and for applying that technology towards building better products.
So when you were at Bell Labs, this is early in your career. Was there a challenge that forced you to grow faster than you expected?
You know, Bell Labs was a complete learning experience. It really, probably my first interesting challenge came with my next job. I went from Bell Labs to a smaller startup company, and that transition was really eye opening. I went to a company called Wyse Technologies. And literally, I was recruited by the founders of the company, Bernie and Grace Say. They were had a very explosive company that the Weiss was a company that built terminals for mainframe computers at the time. And my first day, I came in and I went to HR, and then they took me down to where I was going to work. And I said, "So where's my office?" And they said, "It's right here." And it was just an empty cubicle. There's literally nothing in the cubicle whatsoever. It was a floor and three walls. And I said, "Well, there's nothing in this cubicle." And they said, "That's right. Go find it. Go build your own office. You know, you're going to work here. You need to be creative. You need to be passionate. Go build your own office." And literally, from that first day of being at Weiss, I learned a really big lesson, which was, you know, you have to be determined, you have to be creative, you have to overcome obstacles, even to build your own office. And it
Mhm.
was really somewhat of a metaphor for the work experience that I started to build.
Now, before you were at Weiss, you were at Bell Labs. Two questions. How long were you at Bell before you went to Weiss? And did you have your own office at Bell?
Yeah, Bell was a very different experience from that perspective. Bell Laboratories was a very um, esteemed place. There are a lot of very famous scientists. Bill Joy, who invented Unix, worked there. Dave Ditzel, who was one of the early people at Sun Microsystems, worked there. And so they not only gave you an office, you had access to virtually unlimited resources at your disposal. So I went from that coduled environment to hey, you need to build your own
Uh,
office, all within. I worked at Bell Laboratories for about 4 years, 3 or 4 years, and then went to Weiss. And it was just to see the two different diametrically opposed philosophies and spectrums gave me balance to really move between those two types of environments.
Okay. So we learned a little bit about your background, but I'm trying to ease into the point when you made your transition. So I'm assuming that at Weiss, you had this responsibility. They say build it. So I'm sure you came up with certain things technology wise. Was it always accepted, or did you have to go back to the drawing board, as it were? What was it like in those early days when they relied on you to come up with things?
You know, at both companies, again, it was very different. At Bell Laboratories, it was people products were built over a long period of time. There's a tremendous amount of analysis, almost analysis by paralysis. Bell Labs had two sides to the company. They had the basic research side,
Uh-huh.
where people did basic research. They weren't trying to build product. They were just trying to invent things. And then there was applied research. I was actually in the applied research side, which I had much more interest in applying technology to actually solve customer problems. And so that side fit me so much better. But even on that side, you know, I was considered somewhat of a maverick. I would come up with solutions that maybe were a little bit outside of the box, outside of the thinking. And it was really met with do more due diligence, do more analysis. We're not quite ready for that
Uh-huh.
capability. Whereas at Weiss, the founders, I worked directly with Bernie and Grace, and they would always challenge me to think out of the box, to really come up with solutions that nobody else had come up with before. So again, those diametrically two different environments, two different business philosophies, and how to either merge them or choose one over the other helped me build my career.
So early on, author, you mentioned that they were like famous scientists at Bell. You worked with the founders at Wyse. Was there ever a time that you felt that you were underestimated, overlooked, or that you had to prove that you belong?
Not really in those 2 jobs. I was really surrounded by people that in both places either would support, cudgel, lead, give examples. But later on in my career, I went to several other startups, and some were successful and some weren't successful. And I moved up the technology management side. So I became a manager in technology to a VP of engineering. And I had set my sights higher. I really wanted to become more involved in C-level management and ultimately become a CEO of a company. And back in the late 90s and early 2000s in Silicon Valley, it's pretty well known that there was a glass ceiling of sorts. There still remains glass ceilings for certain ethnic groups, but for Asians back then, it was sort of you really should be the pinnacle of your management experience is to be a VP of engineering,
Hmm.
and you really don't want to try to ascend into the C level suite. And so I bucked that trend a little bit, and that was where people I think at least I hope, underestimated my desire, my drive, and my abilities.
Hmm. So it's two different skill sets, as it were. You come from a technical background, but now you're moving into, let's say, leadership roles, and it requires a different set of strengths. Was it difficult moving from technical to the management part for you personally?
I learned a lot of lessons in making that transition, and I mentor a lot of technical people who are moving up the managerial ranks. And I think one of the biggest challenges in general is that when you're technical to begin with and you're moving into management, you may tend to want to try to do the technical work
Right.
rather than listen and provide uh, examples and provide advice.
Mhm.
And I think that's the transition that all technical managers have to do is move from the doing to the
Nurturing and encouraging.
right. I have a philosophy, one of 3 philosophies that I've created over my lifetime, and one of them is, encourage microstatusing, discourage micromanagement. And there's a big difference between those 2. Micromanagement is when you try to dictate or edict what your people should be doing. And microstatusing is intensely listening and encouraging your subordinates to be transparent, to
Mhm.
basically say the good or the bad, so that you can be a positive resource to them as opposed to a micromanaging negative perception to them.
Okay. So that's one of your 3 philosophies. Hopefully, we'll hear the other 2 by the end of our conversation.
Sure. I won't give
So,
it to you all at once.
okay, I like that. Keep us waiting, man.
Right,
Anticipation.
right.
So when you look back, Arthur, early on the early part of your career and your journey, what lesson did you learn the hard way that still influences how you lead today?
I'll never forget the first time I was in a startup when we were building this company, and we got to a situation where we couldn't close financing, and the company had to do a pretty major downsizing. And I was the VP of engineering. It was the first time that I had to let go a significant number. This wasn't just 2 or 3 or 4 people, it was like 50 people. And when you have to let go 50 people, it's the first time as a manager you're tasked to do that. It's a pretty emotional time, and it's a pretty challenging time. And so that was tough for me. And I think, there was a silver lining to that situation. 3 months after we had to do that RIF or reduction in force, we cut a deal with IBM, and I was actually able to rehire 85% of the people that I let go.
Well, that's great.
And so I was really proud of being able to do that.
So what was the lesson you learned?
That you have to persevere, and that when you build a company, you have to take the good with the bad. You can't It's not always all going to be good times. It's going to be tough times. And you learn a lot more about yourself and about the people around you in the tough times than you do in the good times.
Yes. Yep, that's true. Now, you've built through several major technology waves. When you saw the market beginning to change, what kind of resistance did you face from customers, from partners, competitors, or even people inside the industry?
I always focus on customers. And one of the things I've found, whether you're a big customer, a small customer, or a mid-sized customer, is that customers don't want technology for technology's sake.
What do you
Uh,
mean by that?
and they don't want to be on the bleeding edge of a new technology that has not found a solution, is not addressing a problem that the customer has. Customers don't want to just take technology just for technology's sake.
Hmm.
They want solutions. They want products that solve their problems, solve their challenges. And that's really where you differentiate customers that are or companies. You differentiate companies that are customer focused as opposed to just being inwardly technology focused. And this again gets to sort of Bell Labs having two different sides of the business. There's the applied research side, where people were just inventing technology for technology's sake. They had no concept really of how it applied to customers' problem. And then you had the applied research side, which is really that's where you build companies, is taking technology and applying it to solving a customer problem.
Arthur, you mentioned early on that when I asked about the possibility of being underestimated or having to prove you belong in a room, you would come up with different solutions and you would get the response that we're not ready for that. So the question to you, being the person that you are dealing with technology, and even in the last 20 years, a lot of things have changed technology wise. Was there ever a time when that a certain wave was coming or something was coming technology wise, and you were trying to get others on board, but they just couldn't catch up and they disagreed with you and later you were proven to be right? Can you tell of experience something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's happened countless of times. And this gets me to my second philosophical guidepost, if you will. And that is, how do you constantly make great decisions? And the answer for me and what we promote in any of our companies is you make great decisions by making good decisions and refining them over time. And again, there are two important parts to that statement. The first part is you make good decisions. So making no decision is by definition a bad
A
decision.
bad decision,
So
yes.
paralysis by analysis, if you freeze because you're being questioned by your customers or questioned by your investors or questioned by your internal people as to what the direction is, and you make no decision, then that's a bad decision by definition. But the second part of that philosophy is equally, if not more important, which is make good decisions and refine them over time. And what that really means is no decision really can stand the test of time. What happens is you make a decision and you have to constantly take input after you make that decision,
Mhm.
constantly readjust, constantly make micro adjustments. And if you do that over time, that decision ultimately will be, by definition, a great decision. And I can't tell you how many times I've made a good decision, and over time, I've literally reversed that decision and gone the completely opposite direction because of inputs over time, because of competitive analysis, because of technology changes, because of the way customers are evolving, because of economics or macroeconomic conditions. And so, by making a good decision and refining it over time, I believe that we have been able to make as many great decisions as possible over the course of time.
Do you believe that the only bad decision is not making the decision in your field because technology changes like lightning?
Well, there's two ways in my mind you can make a bad decision. The first way is by making no decision. So that I
Okay.
think most people agree. If you make no decision on something, it will be a bad decision because by making no decision, you're freezing yourself and basically not making any movement, any positive kinetic energy towards a goal.
Mhm.
The second way you make a bad decision, as I said, is you make a decision and then you try to drive that decision without taking any further input. So I can't, and this is something that I, since I was an engineer, I think I'm allowed to say this. Engineers struggle with this quite a bit. Engineers will come up with a product requirements document or a spec for a product, and they'll get it agreed to by management, and then they'll want to just heads down implement it, and they don't want to take any more input. They don't want to take, any more suggestions. They just want to go heads down and implement it. But there are times, as you pointed out, where technology evolves, where you
Uh-huh.
have to take into account new technology. AI is a perfect example. It's evolving at hyper speeds. And so you have to just constantly be taking input. Now, the corollary or the reverse of that, the negative reverse of that, is you can't gold plate products. You can't constantly change them with diminishing return. So
Uh-huh.
you constantly have to evaluate: does this change have a good return on investment? So you have to have a balance. When I say refine it over time, the word refine, I think, implies that you're evaluating the return on the investment. I didn't say just make changes
Uh-huh.
constantly over time. I said refine the decision over time. And so I don't know if that makes sense, but it is somewhat of a balancing act. But clearly, not taking any input on a decision over time is just as bad as making too many changes over time.
So, I don't know if there's a correlation here. I remember I'm thinking I was in my preteens or early teen years. We had a VHS player, and then my father came home with this big thing that looked like a record player, and it played movies. It was like a I forgot what it was called. It was a disc, sometimes a large disc,
Laser disc.
laser disc, and that thing lasted for, it seems when I look back in retrospect, for like maybe a year, and they had them all at the stores, and then all of a sudden the DVD
DVD.
came out.
Right.
So I'm thinking the industry or whoever made those, they lost a lot of money because they didn't get a chance to get a good return because that was not the way that the industry went. Have you encountered certain things like that in your industry when it comes to technology and making advancements? Things that come out, but they only last for 6 to 18 months and it's over.
Yeah, the evolution of media is a very interesting evolution. I'm even old enough to remember Betamax tapes, and
Yes.
became VHS, and then it was the laser disc, then it was the CD, then it was the DVD, and I don't have the statistics, but I believe probably every one of those technologies made some money. Maybe they didn't make as much lasting money as possible, but this gets to the core concept of how do you continuously evolve and yet still put products out there that customers want? And ultimately, the decision of success or failure of a product is whether customers buy it, whether customers put their money into it. And I've seen technology evolve, um, in communications, from different types of communications as well. There was the voice phone, and then there was text messaging, then there was the BlackBerry, which
Hmm.
trying to combine kind of phone and messaging together. Then there was the flip phone, and then now there's the iPhone and the Android phone and different forms of communication. Now there's team rooms and there's video conferencing. Each one of those technologies has had sort of their zenith peak aspect, but I think they all have combined together now to provide different multiple channels of communication, each one in its own proper place.
Hmm.
And what PanTerra has done is combine them all together in an all-in-one solution called Streams.ai to allow the customer to pick whatever channel is most effective and efficient for that form of communication between them and their customer or their partners or their vendors or whoever they're trying to communicate with. So, yeah, I think ultimately the definition of success is, are you selling your product? Are customers buying it? Are they saying it does solve a problem? It's not just technology for technology's sake.
Has there ever been a time in your career, Arthur, or a season where either at in your career or at PanTerra, where things were much harder behind the scenes than people on the outside may have really realized?
Yeah, at PanTerra, we are in the business of delivering mission critical 24 by 7 business communications for mid market enterprises. And that means our cloud service has to be up and running 24 by 7, 365 days a year. It can really never be down. And so when you evolve the internal platforms, the internal technologies, and you move them from one platform technology to the next platform technology, you have to do that 100% transparent from your end customer. Your end customer doesn't really care what the platform is behind the scenes. So they don't want to see any difference in their feature function or functionality or uptime or resiliency or
Hmm.
availability. So there are many times when we're upgrading technology in the background, and it has to be totally 100% transparent to our end customers.
Because they just want results.
And they just want their service to work and
Yeah,
be
exactly.
reliable and have quality of service. They don't really care that it was running on, fifth generation servers or eighth
Right.
generation servers, and whether it was on this type of cluster for reliability or that type of cluster for reliability, or it's on this framework or that framework. They just want it to work.
Hmm. So, when you were an engineer and a technician, as it were, and you would come up with different things, you work on products, but you had someone that answer to you, and they would say, "Arthur, we're not ready for that. That whatnot." That's one thing. But now, as a leader, when you became a leader, and you would have, and as a visionary, because you are a visionary, you come up with these ideas that, as you said, even notice when you were early in your career, out the box. How do you lead when there's a chance that others may not believe in what you're doing? How do you stay committed to the vision to bring a product or technology to life, even though you may not have the support of those who work with you?
So that brings me to my third
Oh,
philosophy.
yes.
Get the great front man here. Um, and that really is, you know, to be really successful in the long term in this business, you need to encourage passion and discourage emotion. So
Courage, passion,
encourage passion, discourage
discourage
emotion.
emotion.
There's a big
Mhm.
difference between being passionate and being emotional. And I use the example of two engineers who are trying to propose their solution to a particular problem to management, and management's sitting at the chalkboard. And one engineer puts up their proposal on the chalkboard, and the other engineer starts to debate that solution. When you're passionate, the two engineers will always be looking at the chalkboard. They will always be debating what's on the chalkboard. When they become emotional, they start turning at each other
Hmm.
and they start debating the other person. And that's when emotions get into it. And that is really a negative characteristic. So I always encourage passion, discourage emotion. When you're passionate about something, then you are always paying attention to to achieving the goal and to improving the product. And even if people are naysayers or doubters, as long as you stay passionate and don't become emotional, don't start attacking the person who's questioning your solution or your drive. Stay passionate towards the goal of what you're trying to achieve, and you will always end up on top. And if you really choose, these three philosophies of encourage passion, discourage emotion, encourage microstatusing, discourage micromanagement, and how do you make great decisions, make good ones, and refine them over time. I found that those three philosophies a great basis for creating and building long-term companies.
What has been one of the toughest setbacks you had to work through as a CEO? And what do you think that setback revealed about you?
Whenever you're involved with startups and privately held companies, it's always about raising money and bringing in new investors. And I think one of the challenging things is when you don't have a successful financing run, you don't have a successful raise of financing, and that can result in reductions in forces. It can result in adjustment of goals. It can be sometimes almost catastrophic. It can certainly be an inflection point for companies, and those are tough. Those are challenging times. As I stated, my first riff that I had to really do is 50 people, 50 plus people. Um, and what it's really taught me is to be resilient. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if you really want to be passionate about something, you have to take the good with the bad, and you have to drive through the bad times because while they'll give you some scars on your back, they're going to leave you with important lessons that you'll have learned to stay determined, to stay passionate, and to continue to drive in a positive way.
So let's talk a little bit about the emotional weight of leadership. You had switched from being an engineer, you went into management, and then you started your own company. Entrepreneurs and CEOs alike carry pressure privately. Was there a time when the weight of leadership felt especially heavy for you, Arthur?
I don't know if I can point to a especially heavy time other than the general times where we've had to make adjustments in personnel.
Mm-hmm.
It's always tough. Every company I've been in has been as much a family, and I tend not to really get to know everyone on a personal as well as a professional level. And I think, when you're in the C-level suites,
Mm-hmm.
you really have people that you're responsible for, that you're accountable for, that you have to hopefully lead. And one of the things that I have really taken to heart is when you bring people into a company, it's as much about helping them achieve their professional goals as it is about them helping your company achieve their corporate goals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as leaders, those two things have to be balanced. You want your employees to achieve their own personal, professional goals. You can't ignore that. And that sometimes weighs heavy, and other
Mm-hmm.
times it can be the most fantastic reward um, in building companies.
So, when you think about leadership, Sometimes the numbers say something different than you expected. Sometimes customers may react different than what you may have hoped, or the market may change, the timing may change. What do you do when that happens? How do you process that personally when the numbers, the customer response, or the timing does something different from what you expected?
You have to, as I said, constantly make real-time adjustments. You have to constantly be listening. Listening is a skill that I think is gotten a lot of emphasis lately, but well, for a long time, listening was not a great skill that
A
leaders had.
lost art.
Was a lost art. So continuously listening and intensely listening, and never losing faith and staying passionate about the business. These are things you're going to hear me constantly regurgitate these sayings, but they really mean something to me and how we drive our companies.
So, did you ever have moments where you doubted or questioned whether a strategy, product direction, or a business decision was going to work?
Oh, constantly. And
Constantly.
Andy Grove, who was the founder of Intel, I think said it best. He said, be paranoid. Constantly look over your shoulder. Constantly, feel the burn of your competitors. Never be complacent, even if you're the leader in your industry. And I think, he built a great company, and that philosophy has stuck with me as well.
Okay. So, with that same line of questioning, in these difficult decisions that you're put in, I know you constantly check, constantly want to know if the sentiment has changed. Do you tend to still contact mentors, or do you tend to look at your group and say, "Hey, what can we come up with?" Or are you the person that just rely on your past experiences?
The answer to that one is all the above.
Okay.
Absolutely. In today's world, if you really want to make it over the long term, you need to depend on mentors. You need to depend on those people that you feel have more experience or have at least as broad experience as you. At my level, that means board members, that means industry leaders, that means industry analysts, that means other investors in the space. But you also learn to rely on your team. You've built the team, you've helped build the team. You're passionate about that team. You care about that team both professionally and personally. And when you can earn the respect of your team, and that's one thing that has to be earned. It can't be dictated. Um, what you get back in return for that respect is transparent, honest feedback and their thoughts in real time, and that's super important as well. And then, from the internal aspects, what I've learned over these number of years is to really constantly stay balanced. That if you burn yourself out, if you try to burn the candle at both ends, it might help in the short term, but in the long run, your sanity really gets tested. And so, I really try to stay balanced in my personal and professional life. A small aside, I have 10 kids, and so that keeps my personal side very, very busy.
Yes, definitely. Um, in your field of work, everything doesn't work, if that makes sense. In your line of work, everything does not happen. So you deal with so-called, I say, quote, failure, because as most entrepreneurs, the mindset is they're nothing but learning lessons. So
Right.
when you're faced with failure, disappointment, or maybe technology being delayed, what have you learned about yourself, patience and humility wise?
Well, those are the two cornerstones to I think, solid leadership is patience and humility. And I think what I've learned over my career is that I didn't have a lot of either one of those in the very beginning, and I had to, through mentors and through instructors and teachers, uh, I learned that those characteristics are fundamental building blocks to being a good leader. And so, you sort of said it before I could say it. Patience, humility, earning people's respect, not dictating that,
Uh-huh.
and the three philosophical guideposts that I've developed over time are really what has helped me over these years.
Now, the reason I ask that question, author, because I'm gonna take it on an assumption that you're very, very, very intelligent. And when people are very, very intelligent and they come to contact with others that may not be on the same wavelength as them, it can test their patience. And this is seen a lot, as you mentioned, in younger people who are very intelligent. But as a leader and a CEO, you have to be faced with certain things on a regular. So that's why I asked that question. So, and you really put light on it. What's needed to lead is patience and humility. So that's why I asked the question, because people who invent and are very innovative and come up with technology before other people can see it happening, sometimes it's like, come on, hurry up and catch up with me. That could be the mindset, because that's the curse of being very intelligent, Mr. Chang.
Well, I don't know if I'm very intelligent, but I will say that, what I've learned is that everyone can contribute when they feel they're in an environment where contributing positively or negatively will both be rewarded with listening and with empathy. And
Hmm.
so, that's what we strive to do is to really create an environment where everyone can feel they can contribute at their maximum and achieve their maximum potential.
That's a good company culture to develop. Yes. So let's talk about leadership growth and building the company itself. As PanTerra continued to grow and evolve, what did you have to change about your leadership style? Well, you already mentioned that. You mentioned you had to learn to be more patient and be more humble. Was there experience that you said you talked to your mentors? Was there an experience, and you don't have to be detailed, but did something happen to make you say, I really need to change the way I handle these matters?
I don't know if there was any one particular experience, but the other thing that I've learned over time is to be self-reflective. So, when you're self-reflective, you can understand, you can be transparent with yourself. You can look at your faults and your warts and your weaknesses, and you can see them as areas to improve and what you could do differently. When I was building Pantera, when you build any company, you evolve a little bit. So when you first build a company, it's all about bringing in like totally like-minded executives that are like you. Or I actually have a saying. I say, always hire people that are smarter than you.
Mm-hmm.
If you hire people that are smarter than you, that you feel can actually take your job, those are the kind of people that'll help you build a company. And so that's kind of that when you get that layer of executives in. But then as you expand out from the executive level into their subordinates and the people who are actually doing the work in the company, you need a broader perspective. You need to understand that not everyone is going to be at an executive level from both potential or skill level or execution. So you look for certain um, behaviors, characteristics, and not necessarily the same level of experience and aptitude. So you empower your executive team to actually find those people that can do the work and earn their respect, so that you can create a company culture that's passionate about achieving goals, but has the appropriate level of understanding at each level of execution, what's expected of them. And so, you know, when you grow companies, you have to go through these different
Mm-hmm.
layers of bringing in people.
So from your experience, what's harder to build? Technology, a team, or belief in the company's direction?
So you asked me that today after, many decades of building companies and being in the business, I would say building the technology is the hardest because the other two, building a team and building corporate culture, I've done over and over and over again. And those actually have very little external things that are out of your control. Whereas when you build the technology, there are a number of things that are out of your control. The technology itself, unless you created the technology, if you're using like AI, we didn't create AI, we're using AI. And so there are a lot of external factors that are out of our control. How fast that technology goes, what new LLM models or new AGI models or agentic models are being developed. And so when you have parameters that are out of your control, out of your direct control, that can result in a little bit more challenge when you're building that technology or building that product. So ask me that today, it's building the technology. You ask me that, 20, 30 years ago, it would be building a team and creating a corporate culture. But I think I've got that down now.
So, as a leader, when employees or even stakeholders are uncertain about a new direction, how do you lead them without pretending you have all the answers?
By being honest and transparent. And as I said, by constantly driving great decisions. So when they see that you're making decisions and you're refining them over time, then they have faith in you, they have respect in you, and when you're honest and transparent with them, they know that they're not going to get surprises.
Hmm.
Surprises is one of the probably worst things management can do to investors.
Surprises, yeah, I would imagine. Um, we talked about the hard and difficult decision to lay off at least 50 employees at one given time, and that was a very hard time for you. What mistake have you made as a leader that helped you become a better leader once you understood the lesson from the mistake?
I've made countless mistakes, but I would consider them not mistakes. I made countless good decisions that maybe I didn't follow my own philosophy and refine them over time, or it took a while for me to figure out, okay, I need to take this input and refine it over time. And, I won't go over any one particular mistake, but, a mistake is by definition a point in time, an evaluation of a decision in a point in time.
I like that.
And so along the continuum of time, you can take a mistake and you can turn it into a great decision by adjusting that mistake. And there are countless of times where that's happened. We've made a technology directional move, for example, and we've gone down this route. And let's say it turned out we were partnering with this third party development team, and that team just didn't deliver, for
Mhm.
example. And we've had to make adjustments in real time to bring it back in house. And that cost us months of not putting the product out in a timely fashion. And so that was a challenging time for us, for example. That's one example, but there are many examples. But if you let the wrong decision just fester and be the end point, then you're never gonna create a great company. So, when we determined that that contractor was not doing the job, first we monitored, we had metrics, we had measurements, and then we made the decision to bring it in-house. And now we've adjusted, and yeah, we lost a couple months, but the product is now out, the customer is happy, and they're buying the product. So we took a bad decision and again made it into a great decision over
Yeah.
time.
So, how do you balance confidence and humility when leading through uncertainty? Because we don't know what's going to happen in the next ten years. And when it comes to technology, like you say, it's changing so rapidly, especially artificial intelligence and things of that nature. So, how do you balance confidence and humility when you're leading through the future and you don't know what the future is? I think you're going to say you got principles I'm learning that has guided you from your time as an engineer all the way to a leader. So I think I know what the answer is.
Yeah, well, I could clearly restate my 3 philosophies, but I think, the other thing that when you talk about confidence and humility, these are internal characteristics of leaders, but they emanate to other people in your organization through another word, and that's called respect.
Hmm.
And you can always lead when you've earned respect. And the opposite is also true. It's almost impossible to lead if your subordinates have no respect for
This
you.
is so true.
And
Yeah.
so that's a key word that you have to earn. You have to earn that word. And that if you have respect, your company, your employees will follow you and will help lead you to the promised land, really.
And transparency will help you get that respect.
Absolutely. Being honest and transparent.
A lot of companies struggle to let go of what used to work. How do you know when PanTerra needed to evolve instead of simply protecting an old model?
It's always a challenge. I talked about, moving from an old technology platform to a newer technology platform. And, whether it's AI, whether it's cloud services, you have to just constantly be evaluating what's out there. You have to, and that goes to the word passion. When people are passionate about something, it's not a chore to really be up to date. It's not a chore to be looking at the horizon and seeing where the technology is going. It's almost, I don't want to say it's a game, but it's an excitement. It's a
Hmm.
positive thing for leaders to do this. So we embraced AI, we embraced communications at PanTerra, and we're passionate about it. And that allows us to really look at these disruptive technologies and map them out and try to figure out. We also have another saying where, and I'm sure you've gotten the gist of this, but we have a crawl, walk, run philosophy at PanTerra. We again don't want to take technology and just throw it in our customer's face. So we'll listen to the customer, we'll take the disruptive technology, and we'll create a crawl solution, then a walk solution, then a run solution, so that the customer is not just inundated with technology. A perfect example of that is we have a receptionist called Luna, which will answer calls for companies and automate through contextual analysis of the conversation, route the call to an appropriate place within the company. It might be customer support, might be sales, might be billing. Um, but some of our competitors have put that product out or a similar product without guardrails, without really safety guardrails, and it creates hallucinations or potential for hallucinations in the conversation where the AI receptionist can hallucinate on what the customer contextually is saying and then go off in a completely erroneous tangent. And that creates customer frustration and ultimately creates loss of potential revenue. And so, when we put Luna out, we were a little bit later to the market, but we put very safe guardrails, number one, and we put an inherent contextual analysis that would redirect the caller to a human receptionist
Hmm.
instantly if there was any negative sentiment interpreted in the call. So if the Luna sensed frustration in the customer's conversation, instead of trying to repeat what it said or make a guess as to where to transfer the call, it would immediately transfer to a human capable receptionist. And so, these are things that you do when you crawl, walk, run in delivering new technology, which we think has benefited the Pantera approach.
So when it comes to new technology, everyone's talking about AI, as you mentioned. What do you think a lot of leaders in different industries are afraid of when it comes to AI or automation?
I don't know if afraid is the right word. I think the industry has a right to be cautious about where AI is going. And, right now, AI does a very good job of kind of augmenting and being a tool for humans to replace to perform low level repetitive tasks, so that humans can focus on more of the creative, thoughtful tasks in the
Hmm.
business. But I think as we start to approach artificial general intelligence, AGI, you know, there's a lot of concern in the marketplace about guardrails, about
Hmm.
safety guardrails, and about bad actors in the global world getting access to AGI, and I think that's prudent. And I think it's one of the first technologies where, as it grows and it evolves, guardrails will be an absolute important part. Safety guardrails will be an
Hmm.
absolute global importance to the
Yeah,
technology.
like a necessity almost.
Absolutely.
And every I've talked to quite a few entrepreneurs, as you can imagine, Mr. Chang, and every industry mentions AI. Now
Right.
you've talked about you've spoken about AI. I've read doing research for this interview. You've talked about how AI should support human interaction instead of replacing it. So my question is to you: what is the distinction, or why is this distinction very important for business leaders, for employees, and for customers?
I think really understanding the efficiency and effectiveness of AI as it stands today and how it's evolving is very important. I'll give you an example. There was a company, I won't name the name of the company, who jumped on AI agents technology so quickly. They basically let go their whole customer support organization and replaced all of those humans with a support AI agent. And what they found is that number one, the technology wasn't quite ready for prime time. It created hallucinations, and it ultimately created so much customer frustration and negativity that this company had to basically revert back to bringing in humans again into the support organization, and they went to a more augmentation
Mhm.
model rather than a replacement model. And that's, I think, an extreme example. You're going to have those extreme examples in order to get humans to understand that that was an extreme example. In
Uh-huh.
other words, you have to have those kind of failures to really understand the limitations of the technology. And so I think it's I think it's incumbent on every company to implement some aspect of a crawl, walk, run
Mhm.
implementation strategy with AI. And that doesn't mean we don't ultimately get to AGI and some of these much more advanced agentic kinds of solutions, but it does mean that never lose sight of who's paying your bill. It's your customer. And your
Yes.
customer doesn't want technology for technology's sake. It wants
Uh-huh.
technologies that actually solve a problem and solves a problem in a high quality manner.
Yes. So what you that extreme example is a company that ran instead of crawling and walking
Correct.
first.
Correct. And they stumbled.
Yes, definitely. If you could go back and look and reflect on your time and your journey in your career, would you change anything built on the wisdom that you have now? Would you do anything differently?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this very early on in my career. I was probably less humble and overly confident in my capabilities than I should have been. I think I made changes and movements in my career very early on that were probably slightly premature. I should have stayed at Wyse a little bit longer. I should have stayed at some of my other companies a little bit longer and learned more about um, driving success under adverse conditions.
Mhm.
And so, my career path was long and evolved, and if I got could go back, I would say I would have tried to make it a little bit less transition and learn more at each one of my stations in life.
Interesting, interesting. When entrepreneurs listen to your story, especially those dealing with obstacles, opposition, setbacks, or uncertainty right now, what lesson do you hope they take away from what you kept building through change?
Well, I'm sure you know the answer to that. It's my three philosophies. So make great decisions, micro status, don't micromanage, and encourage
There's
passion,
courage, passion, not
discourage.
emotion. Yeah,
Right.
not yeah.
Right.
So, as you look at technology changing in the future, as you look ahead, what does meaningful innovation look like to you now compared to how you saw it earlier in your career?
I don't think it really has changed, but I think, this understanding of the difference between a basic research and applied research is something that I think people need to really internalize. In other words, when you create new technologies and invent, that's called inventing.
Hmm.
But when you solve customer problems and you want to bring products to the marketplace, that's called applying that research or applied research. And that meaningful innovation means applying an invention or a basic technology to solving a customer's problem. The customer needs to always be part of the input of the solution.
Yeah, because that's who's going to be purchasing it and you using whatever
That's
the
right.
product or
Right.
service is. So when people look back at your work, your leadership, and the companies you helped build, what do you hope they say you made possible?
You know, what I hope people take away from my career and my legacy is that I helped people achieve their personal and professional goals.
Okay.
That's really what drives me is creating opportunities for people to achieve their professional goals, and as part of that, they achieve their personal goals. And if you can do that in one, two, three, or four companies, I'd say that's a pretty successful career.
Yeah, I would agree. So for those who are watching and listening and they want to know more about you and your company, how can they find out more about you and your company?
Go to our website, www.panterranetworks.com. That's where you can find out all about streams.ai, the first all-in-one business communication solution. And I really appreciate you having me on.
Author, thank you for being on the show with us today. This conversation is a reminder that innovation is not just about chasing trends, it's about the person leading through uncertainty. It's about the pressure behind the scenes, about the resistance that tests your beliefs, and about the discipline to keep evolving when the market continues to change. For founders and executives and business leaders who are listening out there, Author's journey shows that longevity does not happen by accident. It takes resilience, adaptability, humility, and the courage to keep building when the path is not always clear. To everyone watching and listening, thank you for joining us on Ingleside Review's Innovators Unveil. You can watch the show on the Bravehearts TV network, on YouTube. You can listen in the Alive Podcast Network app and on all major podcast platforms. Until next time, keep innovating, keep creating, and never stop unveiling the innovator in you. I'm your host, A.D. Edwards, signing off.
This has been Ingleside Reviews, Innovators Unveiled, hosted by A.D. Edwards. For more conversations with innovators and business professionals, follow the show on your favorite podcast app, subscribe on YouTube, watch on the Bravehearts TV network, and visit innovatorsunveiled.com to learn more about the show and upcoming guests.